the amount of lies we're being told, the amount of spin, the amount of the extent to which the institutions of our government are being taken over and politicized are things to genuinely get grumpy about, yes.
Welcome to another episode of Counterculture, the show that stands at the intersection of reason and faith in the battle against sentimentality. What better time to have the Grumpy Economist, as he calls himself, on our show than when nearly 3/4 of Americans are grumpy about the economy? Wall Street may love a devalued dollar, but Wall Street doesn't have to go grocery shopping or fill up the tank. K Street may love naked rent-seeking dressed up as saving the planet, but K Street doesn't have to do a couple loads of laundry with washing machines that don't wash while trying to make dinner for the kids. The men and women of always on the fancy streets have made life more costly and more difficult for the families on Main Street. Rather than acknowledging reality or having the humility to pivot, officialdom treats those Main Street families with the sort of misinformation it would have social media platforms censor if it was the target. The rate at which prices are increasing is newspeaked into prices are coming down. Grocery stores reducing the size of products to constrain price increases for their customers is cast as predatory greed. Wage increases aren't keeping up with price increases because of stingy employers who won't pay a living wage, we're told. Enter California Congresswoman Barbara Lee to propose a $50 per hour minimum wage. Oh, and pay no attention to the millions of migrants invited to enter this country illegally, whereafter they will be provided food, shelter, and health care at your expense, and as needed, displace your kids from their schools and our war veterans from their retirement homes. If economics is the study of human behavior toward desired ends in a world of scarce means, what should we anticipate will be the response from human beings in an environment where they are being fleeced by a system they finance? To offer some thoughts on that question and related matters, we're pleased to be joined by John Cochran, the Rosemarie and Jack Anderson Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution, who blogs at the Grumpy Economist, which is found at johnhcochran.blogspot.com. John, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. And I'm also now grumpy-economist.com.
Okay, that's even easier. Grumpy-economist.com. Okay, but see, you're such a pleasant, amiable guy. There's a lot to be grumpy about, but you don't seem too grumpy.
Stay optimistic in life.
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry.
Right, happy warrior. So what about that? What about our expectation of how people would be and should be reacting when they are living one reality and they're told not to believe their lying eyes or lying ears from their electeds?
You should be grumpy. And I think the amount of lies we're being told, the amount of spin, the amount of the extent to which the institutions of our government are being taken over and politicized are things to genuinely get grumpy about, yes.
And so, you wrote this piece in the Journal recently about Trump voters, and so much has occurred between Trump first riding down an escalator 9 years ago, and today, and yet it seems like not much has changed.
I don't know. Enormous amounts have changed. Did you watch what happened during the pandemic?
Well, in terms of. Well, no. But of course, a lot has happened. But not much has changed. In by way of saying that the rationale for Trump's candidacy in 2024 is virtually the same as it was in 2016 when Michael Moore, a man of the left, said he was basically the human Molotov cocktail that disaffected Americans were waiting to throw.
Oh, I see your point, and I think that's a good one. I think the one word that cemented the 2016 election was deplorables, and the sense that the Washington establishment, whatever, they may say they're all for you, but in fact they want to run the country on your behalf, or at least that's the way Trump supporters see it. And I want to appeal to, all sides here. If you're a Democrat, try to listen and understand what half of your fellow citizens are feeling right now, and the sense that their country, their political system, their institutions are being torn out from under them. It's not completely unreasonable, dear Democratic friends.
Well, and also, too, just based on the polling information I sort of alluded to at the outset, nearly 3/4 of Americans don't feel economically secure, feel the country is on the wrong track economically. So that necessarily includes a whole lot of people center left or even left.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting perception because by standard metrics, the unemployment rate is low, GDP is growing, we're not in a recession and so forth. So what does that mean? And I think when they say that country's on the wrong track, what they mean is that growth is obviously slowed down. It's really hard to get the permits to do anything. But most of all, they feel that the institutions of their government, the institutions of their society, the bedrock things that we all depend on are going off track. When in the pandemic, the FDA and the CDC are lying to us, as been shown, are telling us things they know are false to try to constrain our behavior, that gets people mad. And, you watch every time they ladle some new indictment on Trump, his poll ratings go up. Got to hand it to Trump. He's got this talent for getting the Democrats to overreact. But I think that's, you want to understand, if you're a Democrat and you want to understand what's going on with Trump, you get a prosecutor who campaigns on let's go get Trump. She goes and gets Trump for overstating the value of his real estate. Heavens, as if Goldman Sachs doesn't have a tape measure. That our justice system being used for political ends is the kind of thing that makes ordinary Americans mad, no matter what the GDP and the unemployment rate are like.
Well, one of the points that you made, too, in some commentary on your blog about your op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, calling, as many have over the last several years, to no great effect, for people to maybe listen to what their fellow Americans are saying, separate what you see on cable TV from what your neighbor is saying, is one of the things that Trump does is he has some appreciation for the market feedback loop. He actually listens to what's happening and what people are saying and where people want to go. And, he sort of gives them what they want, at least the constituency that he can reach.
Well, he did that certainly in 2016. You look at the history of that election, and he heard people on immigration, on what's happened to their communities, and he went with it. And, we call that populist, but we want politicians who listen to the concerns of their voters. And he heard them on how they were being treated as deplorable. I'm not sure that's happening this time around. A lot of what Trump's talking about is his own vendettas, not about the concerns of the American people, which have changed in the last 8 years. And I think that's a weakness going into the general election.
Well, I mean, the situation at the border certainly is not anything new. If anything, it's been exacerbated exponentially by Biden, and it becomes even more of a center-cut issue for Trump and Republicans generally.
Absolutely. Kind of funny to see Biden turning around and taking on Trump's policies. Of course, neither side is really, the border situation is one we know how to fix. We have an insane asylum system that grants people rights, but then doesn't give the money to do that. We don't have sensible immigration. We need immigration. We need good, high-skilled immigration, people who come to America, want to work hard, start companies, pay taxes, bail out our Social Security and our government. But we have a system that's just completely chaotic. But yes, the chaos has only gotten worse, and the Biden administration is really hurting over that.
I like how the way you said that, too, rather than insane space asylum, insane asylum. That's what it's that actually, I think that's more accurate. I think that's what people feel about this. They're looking at this and say, you can't be serious. 60 Minutes and Fox News are both filming the same 3-foot gap in the fence in the San Diego sector that and Border Patrol is standing there not doing anything, and the property owner, the private property on the other side says, I watch this all the day, nobody can do anything, nobody says anything, we can't get authorization, we don't have the, and they just look like this is it's like a Mel Brooks movie to watch this happen at, this same 3-foot space that tens of thousands of migrants, a lot of, as 60 Minutes reported, single Chinese men coming through that section of the border fence, and people are like, I mean, this can't be serious.
Yeah. Whereas on the other hand, suppose that you live in Mexico or India and you're a doctor or a programmer and you want to come to the U.S. and start a new company and vote Republican.
Right.
You can't. it'll be hundreds of years before you get into the country. So come on, we gotta fix the immigration system, not just completely shut it down. But what's going on now is crazy.
Well, so what's your larger, what do you think the reaction is to sort of the plea that you made for people to be a little bit more considerate of their neighbors? Forget the politicians and your dislike of them. Just listen to the guy next door who's similarly situated and says, this is why I'm leaning Trump's way, even whatever qualms I have about him. How do you, what sort of reaction do you get when you make that effort, maybe interpersonally?
Well, part of the problem is we very seldom have neighbors who disagree with us anymore. I live in the progressive bubble of Palo Alto, and nobody knows an actual Republican. So if they listen to their neighbors, all they hear is farther more to the left. And people who have slightly dissenting views know to keep their mouths shut. So, listen, get out a little bit, listen across the country. Go meet some people who are your fellow citizens, especially, Democrats keep saying, oh, we want to preserve democracy. Well, these people are your fellow citizens. So you can't just quash them and call them evil and despicable. Yeah, but
you're in Palo Alto. You're not some, it doesn't strike me. I don't know what your technical affiliation is, but it doesn't strike me you're some wild-eyed leftist. You seem pretty rational. So when you say, have you ever considered this to some Palo Alto residents, similar, neighbor, who's got an advanced degree in this and that, and they're way left, and they hate Trump, and they think he's the end of civilization. What does that person say when you say, "Did you ever look at it this way"?
Those are difficult conversations, and there's a lot of Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing. Just bring up his name, and people stop thinking.
Yeah. The other piece of it that I mentioned at the outset that you sort of addressed too in your piece is the rent-seeking behavior that's supposed to be in advance of saving the planet, but it makes life more expensive and more complicated for just your average American family. And you talked a little bit about this with respect to all of the sort of Green New Deal, green energy type of mandates and targets, which are coming after one appliance after the other.
Yeah, that's true. First, I have a better answer to your last question. What typically happens in conversations is people just retreat to their spin. I talk to a Democrat and they'll say, oh, but Trump is a danger to democracy and he's going to be the next Hitler. And it's very hard to say, really? Explain to me how that happens. No, you're exactly right. I think one of the things that Americans are mad about, and once they see what's coming, they'll be madder about, is this forced transition to, and I don't want to call it necessarily green, let's call it ineffective. Battery-powered electric cars do not actually save a lot of carbon. They are not going to make a big dent in climate change, even if you swallow the 100% climate change. And I think we've all noticed washing machines don't wash, toilets don't flush, showers don't clean. One of the best things that Trump did was he passed an executive order letting us get back to this stuff. And that's also, by the way, ineffective, because what happens when the washing machine don't wash? You run it 3 times. What happens when the dishwasher don't clean? Well, you go wash by hand, which uses way more energy and way more stuff. Here in Palo Alto, they've banned natural gas hookups. You have to have electric heat and electric stoves. Where does that electricity come from, I wonder? Right. They burn natural gas. So, someday in the future, the solar cells are going to work at night, and maybe that'll make it work. And coming down the pike, America is, in California already, and a lot of the other country, a ban on new sales of internal combustion engines. And just adjust that a little bit. There's nothing wrong with maybe a little battery-powered runabout, but you want to drive a truck pulling a trailer from here to Texas like I did last summer. Good luck on a battery-powered one, and you will not be allowed to buy one.
Well, right. And so, these are all sort of ideological gambits that have no cost-benefit analysis and, frankly, seem generally unconcerned with cost-benefit analyses because it's all done in the name of saving the planet. And so when you make those sort of global appeals to a coming apocalypse that this will avoid, I guess you can snow enough, at least Californians, to to continue to advance those flags. I mean, it just seems to me that one of the things that the government-centric class has been able to do effectively is completely disconnect policy choices from consequences, and people seem to be fine with this.
Well, you said a wonderful technocratic word, which I'm going to emphasize here, cost-benefit analysis. There is a larger debate that's going on, climate versus no climate, but let's meet in the middle and at least agree that what we do should make sense in terms of how many dollars it costs us and how many tons of carbon it actually reduces. And you never hear that. What you hear is this moral crusade. But moral crusades spend trillions and trillions of money to very little benefit. I think the poster child is the high-speed train now from Bakersfield to Modesto. I think $130 billion will save absolutely zero carbon, but that's just throwing money down a rat hole to feel good. So at least let's meet in the middle and honestly tell us how much carbon does this save and how much are we going to spend to do it. And I think that would be a nice place to meet in the middle. But you're right. You're facing not a technocratic debate. You're facing a moral crusade, half of which explicitly says degrowth. China, Africa, and India need to stay dirt poor for another century and not even be able to heat their houses the way we do in the name of climate. And the rest of us should go back to digging with hose in our backyards, which also means getting rid of a lot of people. That's a strong element of this crusade, which is going to be really disastrous for Western civilization.
Yeah, and eating bugs. Right. I also love the high-speed train because we had that in my home state of Illinois for a time too. But that $130 billion to go from Modesto and Bakersfield, because that solves a problem, which is you can't get from Modesto to Bakersfield fast enough. Is that the fundamental problem in California?
Well, this one started vaguely sensible. It was going to be San Francisco to LA. Of course, there's this wonderful technology called the airplane, which gets you from San Francisco to LA really nicely. They leave every half hour. They cost unbelievably low amount. But nonetheless, we're going to rehab the 19th century version. But then the costs just exploded. The problem with American infrastructure isn't that we don't spend enough money on it. It's just that the costs are, $4 billion a mile to build a subway in New York City. This high-speed train now in its 15th year, not a single mile of track laid. Meanwhile, the robber barons of the 19th century built a railroad over the Sierra by hand in 4 years. We just can't seem to get anything done anymore, which is the larger problem.
Well, the other thing too, is that the problem with the failure to get a high-speed rail up and running is like the failure of our entitlement programs. The problem is it's not big enough. And so, and people have, the things that people don't appreciate because they've sort of been propagandized into a lobotomized state. But Robin Hanson over at George Mason University had a good piece on this the other day, which is, this idea that we don't spend as much as other Western nations on social welfare programs is false. We do. And the amount that we spend on entitlement programs that neither party wants to touch is part of what is bankrupting us. So both sides take different angles of $34 trillion in debt, $120 trillion in unfunded liabilities and say, this is America's ruination, but nobody wants to touch their sacred cows and everybody pretends that they're more or less working, both sides of it really. And it turns out that neither is particularly cost effective nor producing anywhere near the benefits at the cost that were advertised.
Absolutely. And your point bears repeating. We have a European welfare state. A lot of it is hidden, so you don't see it in the explicit spending. If I give you a tax credit, that's the same thing as taxing and then spending. If I say you shall provide health insurance to him, that's the same thing as taxing and then spending. So we just hide it, but the scale of the American welfare state is about the same. So how do we get out of it? A lot of this doesn't have to be an argument of you're bankrupting the country, you're throwing grandma off the back of the train. The programs that we have are uniquely dysfunctional. So cleaning up what we have can help the people who need help a lot better, save a lot of money, and overall control the disincentives. Right now, from about $0 to $60,000 in the US, if you earn an extra dollar of income, you lose a dollar of benefits. Well, duh. At that point, disincentives isn't little fancy word. It's prime things that people understand completely. Well, I can't take that job because I'll lose my housing voucher, I'll lose my food stamps, I'll lose my earned income tax credit. Why should I bother? I'll sit around and not work. So levels of work among lower income Americans are just shockingly low. So fix them. Don't, that's the intermediate between cut and send kick grandma off the train versus bankrupt the country.
Well, part of it too is it seems to me that we've lost a belief in the free enterprise system, and I mean that largely in both parties. You had in the run up to this election cycle, you had Marco Rubio talking about what was the phrase that he used? It was sort of like good Samaritan capitalism. It was sort of this, and it was this idea that, that the free enterprise system that is driven by the profit motive just isn't good enough. It's not good enough for us. And so there needs to be state interventions. The left has their own version of it, redistribution. And Rubio's version of compassionate capitalism is sort of the George W. Bush redux model of interventions in a different way to produce different supposed goods. But that seems to me a fundamental problem, and you see it in some of the polling in terms of younger generations having less and less good feelings about capitalist system, about the free enterprise system. I mean, I think when we talk about the entitlement programs, who is bringing up what W tried to bring up in his second term, that thinking about going to private savings account with Social Security? Who's really talking about what even Paul Ryan tried to bring up several years ago, which was rethinking Medicare and Medicaid in terms of how it's structured to make it a little bit more connected between provider and consumer. And all that stuff is off the table. Nobody wants to talk about that. We don't believe in free market solutions to these human problems, these problems of distributing scarce resources.
Absolutely. And it is kind of sad that both sides are in it. There's a new tariffs and protectionism, industrial policy. Both sides are happy to subsidize chips or whatever's the latest thing. My joke is that the CHIPS Act will do for semiconductors what the Jones Act did for merchant marine, which is to destroy it.
Right.
The hilariously named Inflation Reduction Act, which is going to send billions of dollars, and creating chip plants that produce chips at 3-4 times the cost of other chip plants is not the greatest thing, so long as the chips and the solar cells and the batteries have union labor and American sourced ingredients. In other words, are about as efficient as our subway construction. And you're also right on these social programs. It's not so much market solutions as solutions that think about incentives. So reforming our chaotic healthcare system. It's good health at outrageous prices, relatively straightforward to fix. Social Security, it needs to become a savings program. Why? To fix the incentives without bankrupting the country. So why can't we do that? We seem to have lost the capacity for centrist reform, but also, as a politician, hey, I removed 100 regulations, I got out of the way, and look, your city is booming. It's very hard to say it's all my benefit, vote for me. Whereas I passed a new handout. We borrowed another $1 trillion from the Chinese and sent you a shower full of goodies. That seems to voters respond to it, and in the end, it's got to come down to voters. Voters have to say no. We don't want your stinking subsidies. We don't want your stinking. We don't want a new program. We don't want another 100,000 pages of regulation. We want you to get out of the way and let this country grow.
Although, I got to say, it's very difficult to come up with a historical example of a population of particularly sort of an empire, the superpower of the world in a particular era, that once its population got comfortable being bribed with their own money, they reversed course and stopped because they could see that it was leading to the end of that status as a global power. I can't think of one.
Well, I don't know. Global powers tend to, by definition, decline, and I hope we can put that off a little bit. They certainly hold the line. The UK for a long 19th century held the line on its institutions and reformed in sensible ways. Lots of small countries reform. Sweden looked at socialism and said, "Yeah, it's not working," and they reformed it substantially. Started growing again. And, eventually things get as bad as they are in Argentina, and voters say, I guess we've tried everything else. We might as well try the libertarian.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting you bring up Milei. What's your handle on him? He's obviously a serious thinker and economist, and he's well read on these topics. He goes chapter and verse, and he's published in a number of areas of economic study as well. But he's brash and he's entertaining. But what he's proposing, if it was to actually come to pass substantially, that could really be a model that spreads because of the success that it would generate, ostensibly, in turning Argentina around.
If it works, it'll be wonderful. And there's Milei as YouTube star and Twitter star, and I recommend him to your listeners. He's fun to listen to. He really explains economics in a wonderful way with a very interesting haircut. Quite a personality.
Yes.
Yeah. As a politician, will he get this through in Argentina? That I don't know enough about Argentinian politics to say yes or no. I think he is going about it the right way. Doing everything at once does make sense. If you try to sequence reforms, that just means we're going to renegotiate all the ones at the end. And he has popular support. And there is a free market movement sort of brewing in Latin America, so there is some hope that this will stick and keep going. So I wish him luck, and I hope actually. The problem is if it falls apart, then another generation will say, well, we tried the free market, that didn't work either, so now we'll try something even worse than what we had before.
The other thing he's doing, though, which is important, the substance is the most important, and affecting the policies that improve life is the most important, and freeing people to pursue their economic interests, which has not been the case with the Peronistas. But the other thing, that moment he had at the World Economic Forum, where he basically said to the assembled panjan drums from the West in corporate America as well as government, you guys are the problem. That was a great moment, because a lot of people think that, even if they are just repeating sort of the line of the globalists are the problem. But he provided a real delineation and a real framing of the choice. We can do sort of the central planning model that you guys want to do, or we can do what I want to do. And he puts it out in stark terms, which, I've been waiting for Republicans in America to do for a long time.
That was a beautiful speech and beautiful expression in the belly of the beast, in the heart of the people who fly private jets to go to Davos to tell us about how we have to degrowth, and the rest of us need to be rationed and not fly anywhere. So that was lovely. Now, yes, it would be lovely to hear that from. I'll take it from the Democrats or the Republicans. Simple common sense.
Yeah, long live freedom, damn it. Damn it. Everything is damn it with an exclamation point. I love it. The closest we probably get is Rand Paul, but he's a little bit more genteel and doesn't have that Dudley Moore haircut either. I'll
give you one sign of hope. Here in progressive California, some progressive Democrats have figured out, there's a housing crisis. Why don't we just let people build housing, and not just government subsidized affordable housing? Let them build housing, because if you build a house for a rich person, he leaves his old house, and now you got another house for a poor person. So the YIMBY movement within progressive Democrats is a live thing. So but I'll take baby steps when I can get them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mentioned it at the outset, but I'd love to get your comment on Barbara Lee, the longtime congressman from California, who's running for the open Senate seat, who proposed and defended a $50 an hour minimum wage in California, because people need to make $100,000 a year in order to live comfortably in California. So just do it by government fiat. It's that simple.
Oh, well, in Palo Alto, 250 grand qualifies you for low income housing. So that should be $125 an hour minimum wage.
Sure, why not? Why not? While you're
Oh,
at it,
wait,
right?
wait, $200 an hour. Why should anyone live? No, $500 an hour. We should all get to go on private jets. That's unfair that I got to fly Southwest.
Well, right, but I mean, but this is, I mean, why wouldn't she argue that? Because what is philosophically different about her position versus those that argued for the livable wage at 15 or 20 or 25? You're just arguing about the pace of the increase. You're not arguing anything that's philosophically different from what she is.
Now, these are interesting, like rent controls are interesting because it's not just because we all know what's going to happen. A lot of people aren't going to get jobs. But what it does when you pass a minimum wage like that, it raises the wages of people who can work full time, people who can obey exactly the schedule the employer wants, people who are already trained, speak English, know how to communicate with customers. It kind of helps the higher end of them, but the teenager, the children of immigrants who doesn't speak English so well, the guy who needs a little time, the mother who needs flexible working hours, those are the ones who really lose from these kinds of things. So it really hurts the most disadvantaged, which is the shocking, the sad feature of it.
Yeah, it's the typical mascot politics. The people that I'm purporting to represent are the people that take the brunt of it. I wanted to get your take too on the Fed's conduct. Jay Powell is this much ballyhooed figure. He's right now in the process of sticking the landing, we're told, coming out of the pandemic and a decade of quantitative easing. What's your perspective on the Fed generally? Being the manipulator of the dollar's value, and Jay Powell specifically?
Well, in general, someone's got to decide how long the foot is going to be, and someone's got to decide what the dollar's worth. So the idea of having a central bank is not one we really need to disagree with that much. I think when the Fed comes, 3 points. First, they blew inflation. Their target was 2% and they got 8%. And they're completely in the dog ate my homework, it wasn't my fault supply shock range. But come on, guys, at least have the decency to say we blew it and how can we not blow it again. When you think of the Fed, though, first, the Fed is not as powerful as you think. What we just saw, why did we get inflation? The government dropped $5 trillion of money on people. They went out and spent it. We got inflation. So inflation fundamentally can come from these fiscal blowouts. The Fed is not that able to control. Also, when you think of the Fed these days, don't just think about interest rates and inflation. Think about regulation. The Fed is now following the ECB all in on we're going to do climate change, climate financial risk. The same crowd that could not see Silicon Valley Bank has a bunch of long-term treasuries and is prone to a run. This is like the first 5 minutes of my banking course. That crowd wants to go out and regulate climate change. It's just amazing. And of course, they want to add hundreds of thousands of pages of additional regulation to the bank. So the failures of regulation are actually even bigger than the failures on inflation. And the move of regulation to try to take on inequality and climate change is something that really we need to stop.
How concerned are you, speaking of that, how concerned are you about sort of politics infecting capital markets and the banking system even more? I mean, there's sort of this give and take going on now. You've had some big players pull out of the net zero deal. You've had some people pull back on DEI, but others are still pressing forward. And Larry Fink is saying we're going to impose it, basically. So I also the story out just last week, which has been brewing for a while, the idea of banks choosing their customers or not, or debanking people for if you're, for example, a legal federal firearm license holder and gun dealer legally, things like that. So, what is your perspective on the threat that, the politics that we were talking about, generally speaking, really further infects financial markets and banking, and has a degrowth impact on the American economy?
Yeah, those are big questions. Now, I am glad to see that the first wave of ESG, climate, and so forth kind of peaked and is now, they're realizing that their actual customers aren't so happy about this stuff. So that business seems to be fading. And that included, some pretty severe. Banks were refusing to lend to oil companies, gas companies. We still need oil and gas for a couple more years, guys. The solar cells aren't quite there yet. Now, for the moment, that was in part in response to private, not just government push. But of course, as it comes from government, the financial system is so regulated that there is a very strong power there to force financial companies to do the political bidding of who's in charge. And I think, along with the institutions of our society that you worry about, that's a big one. And I think you're exactly right to point to the DeBanking. It started with pot growers and weapons and people who we don't like politically, but then the DeBanking movement moved into fossil fuel producers and could move further. And I think the Canadian truckers is a good one to keep in mind, where after protests broke out, peaceful protests, yes, protests, they blocked some roads. The Canadian government went after the bank accounts of truckers and froze them out of the financial system. So that kind of politicization of the financial regulation is something to very much worry about. We're not there yet today, but it's a direction we're heading in that would really, if you don't have the freedom to buy and sell freely, and if the government can watch everything you buy and sell and shut you out of the financial system when they find that you've been guilty of misinformation on the internet, you lose a lot of really basic freedoms.
Well, to that end, should we be suspicious of a government digital currency?
Absolutely. So we need digital currency, and we all use digital currency. If you use if you use the Apple Pay or the Zelle or whatever, you have digital currency. And I do think much more essentially digital currency. If you hold a bank account and that bank account holds reserves at the Fed, that's a wonderful financial system because there can never be any run on that sort of thing. So that's a good model. But for you to hold directly accounts at the Fed, I think has two big problems. The first is when you lose your password, who are you going to call? Oh, Jay, buddy Jay, what's my password? Can you help me out here? The Fed cannot even begin to apply its own regulations to retail accounts. Can you imagine the Fed running a retail-facing website? And the issue of privacy. If you have central bank digital currency, then on a government computer ready to be hacked and leaked is every transaction you ever made or any politician ever made. That's disastrous for our political freedoms, if nothing else. But so a digital currency that is, you have something in a fairly deregulated fintech bank. They make payments seamlessly and much more cheaply for you. No more 4% fees. Thank you very much. But that information is kept private. You need a court order for the government to see it, I think is where we ought to go. So if the
election turns out that Trump is reelected, and the half the nation doesn't take your advice and counsel on thinking about Trump voters, or Jamie Dimon's too, by the way, too. I mean, a few weeks ago, he offered sort of something akin to what you wrote in the Wall Street Journal. Thinking back to Milei, where you should do as much as you can all at once. When it comes to matters economic, all the problems that we've been discussing, and perhaps some on the horizon, what are the couple, three things that a President Trump should do all at once if he were reelected, knowing that even if it's not a seismic change in course, there will be a change in course in terms of economic policy from the Biden administration to another Trump administration?
Well, we're talking about Trump. We're not talking about you, me, or Milei.
No, I understand.
You or I, Milei would do all at once. Number one would be get rid of all the tariffs.
What you'd recommend? Yeah, what you'd recommend? Yeah.
Yeah, I would recommend get rid of all the tariffs. And Trump's not about to do that because,
Right.
he likes tariffs. Look, as we look forward to this election, the idea of Trump is ensconced. He is acknowledged as the legitimate president. He issues executive orders. He proposes legislation that goes through Congress. What's his reform plan for the first 100 days? Forget it. That's not what's going to happen. Our country is headed straight for a constitutional crisis. We're headed straight for everything being embroiled in the courts for the next 4 years. So, that survive is going to be the first order of business. And I mean that seriously. The Democratic Party has bought their own propaganda that he is an illegitimate president because of the 14th Amendment. So he's going to issue an executive order, and they're going to say, we don't pay attention to you. You're not our president. I wouldn't doubt, that he's going to be impeached immediately. The people at the agencies are going to refuse to do what he says. If the Supreme Court votes for, a lot of this election is going to end up in the courts, and people are going to say, well, the courts are illegitimate too. So, I really think that the thing that democracy is supposed to give you is a peaceful transfer of power, where the losers admit the legitimacy of the winner and can go on and lick their wounds without being harassed by the justice system for the next 4 years. That the story of a Trump reelection, which will undoubtedly be narrow, will not be one of what's the John and Millet, ideal 100 days of free market economic reform. It's going to be, can our institutions survive a dedicated attempt where half of the country proclaims the president illegitimate and refuses to do what he says, and we're at each other. There's a civil war in the courts. That's the thing to worry about. And the advice for a Trump is, how do you survive that and keep the country together, not what economic liberalization do you do first or second.
Do you think that that scenario is any different if Biden were to be reelected?
Yes. So certainly, that Trump and his supporters are going to say the election was stolen. They did it once. You can bet they're going to do it again. But I'm a little less worried about that. They tend to be grumpy, but they're not. There's going to be, if Trump wins, there's going to be protests in the streets that make the George Floyd protests look like child's play. They tend to be grumpy, but they tend not to riot in the streets, and they also don't control the Department of Justice, the FBI, all of the administrative agencies, all the legal system, all the levers of power. So they will complain, they will protest, they will proclaim the election illegitimate, but I don't think there's that much they can do about it.
Do you think that people in your academic circles appreciate the scenario that you're laying out, particularly the Trump victory scenario?
No, nobody does. I've been saying this out loud on my podcast and various other places, and everybody just talks about what you asked. Oh, Trump's elected. What's his first executive orders? And I go, he can write whatever he wants. They're just going to ignore him. I mean, suppose there's an anti-Trump riot. He's going to say, call out the National Guard, and the state governors are going to say, you're not my president. I don't do what you say. That, constitutional crisis right there. But nobody wants to hear this. Everyone just says, "Oh, the question you ask is what everyone says." Okay, he's president. So what's his 12-point policy plan for reinvigorating NATO, or for changing the deduction schedule on the corporate taxes going to be? And I go, you got to be kidding. That's not going to be the issue. We're going to be at each other's throats for 4 years. So
well, no, I understand.
I'm out on my own on this one, but we'll see how it goes.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I understand and I appreciate that, but. So part of this is predicated on the idea that, Trump will go toe to toe in a way that a lot of Republicans wouldn't, the way that you're describing. And so he will, I think especially this time around, clip people at a moment's notice. He will install maybe people that are a little bit more aggressive in sensitive positions like Attorney General. And, that can go a lot of different ways. I'm not saying there's no potential downsides there, because there are. But I'm saying that, I think it's actually maybe even more heightened, because I think Trump will respond in the way that he normally does with some of these challenges, which is he'll come over the top of them. And so now you got a real moment. I'm the president. I got the suitcase. I got the military. Don't mess with me.
Well, you have Trump, one of Trump's singular skills, which is his ability to go over the top and make the Democrats go completely nuts,
Right.
which he will do. So as you said, he could say, I'm the head of the military, and then they will scream, we don't need to obey your orders. He will appoint an attorney general that they won't like. And what will they do? They'll go back to his high school yearbook and try to destroy the person. They'll go back, did the proposed attorney general overstate the square footage on his house when he applied for a mortgage? Right. Bing, off we go to the courts. There's going to be, flat out lawfare on anything he does if he's president. So, what policies he wants to put in is going to be second order. It's every single thing is going to be fought out in the courts, in the streets, by every institution, and breaking every norm. We don't just have laws and constitutions. We have norms, things you don't do, and we're just on a tit for tat on both sides of breaking the norms and restraints that keep America together. And it's the old don't bring a knife to a fist fight, don't bring a gun to a knife fight. Well, you tit for tat and things get worse and worse. And I think that's really that's the worry, and then the country falls apart.
Well, buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride, as John Cochran suggests. John Cochran, the Grumpy Economist, grumpy-economist.blogspot.com, right? That's the blog.
Grumpy-economist.com. Thank you. I just moved over to it.
Okay, grumpy-economist.com, of course, and he's a fellow at the Hoover Institution as well. The Grumpy Economist, John Cochran, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. This has been a pleasure. Great interview.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Enjoyed it. Please subscribe to this channel and like this video if you haven't already. It really helps us.